Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back, way back, to a place where the air smells faintly of wet mud and crushed reeds, where the moon glints off a slow-moving river that has seen more office drama than any modern cubicle. You're standing, barefoot, probably regretting it, on the silty banks of the Nile. Cicadas drone, the water laps, and somewhere out there a hippo snorts like the world's oldest espresso machine. You're about to meet the ancient Egyptians, the inventors of paperwork, bureaucracy, and, unfortunately, the earliest version of the "please fill out this form in triplicate" nightmare. You probably won't survive this workload, but don't worry, you won't have to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and the current time down in the comments. I always love seeing how far this sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night air is warm, and you follow the glow of oil lamps leading toward a low mud brick building. Inside, rows of young men sit cross-legged on reed mats, their backs stiff, their hands moving quickly over narrow strips of tan papyrus. The room smells of ink made from soot and gum, of sweat and lamp smoke. This is the nerve center of ancient Egypt's economic world, an office 5,000 years early. The scribes here are the kingdom's information processors, the keepers of grain counts and land records. Without them, the pyramids wouldn't rise. Farmers wouldn't get taxed, which, depending on your viewpoint, might be the dream, and the pharaoh wouldn't know who owed what to whom. You walk past the scribe who's muttering under his breath, tallying symbols for bushels of barley. The hieratic script dances across the page, half shorthand, half artwork. Every stroke means something. A single slip of the reed pen, and you might accidentally promise your neighbor's donkey to the temple. Ancient Egyptians didn't joke about accuracy. Well, not often. The most a scribe might risk is drawing a tiny doodle of a cat in the margin, for luck or boredom. Outside, the Nile rolls on, a liquid spreadsheet dividing the land into neat rows of life. The annual flood, the inundation, is both the chaos and the calendar that keeps this paperwork empire ticking. After the flood recedes, boundaries blur, property lines vanish, and suddenly everyone's arguing over which patch of mud belongs to whom. Enter the scribes again, stepping in with their styluses and measuring cords, restoring the order that nature tries to erase. They are the peacekeepers with pens, the clerks of civilization. Historians still argue whether Egypt's bureaucracy was a blessing or a burden. Some see it as the secret sauce behind 3,000 years of stability. Others call it the earliest evidence of humans turning creative intelligence into paperwork drudgery. Either way, it worked. Taxes were collected, temples stocked, and officials promoted for their neat handwriting. You glance toward a tall man in a white linen kilt, an overseer with a scroll tucked under his arm. His title might sound poetic, something like Chief of Fields and Cattle. But really, he's a manager trying to make sure everyone's numbers line up before sunrise. The Nile doesn't wait, and neither does the pharaoh's grain audit. Out by the riverbank, you can almost hear the rustle of reeds that will soon become papyrus sheets. They grow thick as grass, swaying in the moonlight, waiting to be sliced, pressed, and glued into history. Somewhere deep in your modern brain, there's a faint twitch of recognition. That same paper smell, that same low hum of effort and organization, that same human desire to record everything before it fades. Egypt was, in many ways, the world's first office with a view. The Nile was its postal system, the temples its databases, the scribes its unsung IT department. They didn't have Wi-Fi, but they had the next best thing, an efficient, occasionally terrifying, system that knew exactly how many fish you caught, how many baskets of grain you owed, and probably how often you napped on the job. So, you linger a little longer. Watching the flicker of lamplight over brown papyrus sheets, the sound of reed pens scratching becomes a soft rhythm, like rain on old parchment. And just as your eyes begin to grow heavy, you realize the first bureaucrats weren't villains. They were dreamers, people who believed that order could be written into the chaos of the world, one careful symbol at a time.
The dawn breaks pale gold over the Nile, and you're still here, blinking at a stack of papyrus scrolls that looks suspiciously like your modern inbox. Somewhere in the distance, an ibis cries, sounding oddly judgmental. You rub your eyes and notice the faint grain of the papyrus sheet beneath your fingertips. This isn't just any old writing surface. It's the reason Egypt could organize itself into a civilization rather than a chaotic cluster of villages yelling about irrigation. Papyrus, the plant that turned river reeds into records and humans into administrators. You step outside to see how it's made. Workers slice the tall green stalks lengthwise, revealing pale strips of fibrous pith. These are soaked in water until soft, then carefully layered, horizontal, then vertical, like an ancient lasagna of bureaucracy. Pressed under stones, the plant's sap binds it all together into something durable, flexible, and surprisingly smooth. When dried under the Egyptian sun, it becomes light yet sturdy, a miracle of river chemistry. You can almost imagine the first person to realize this. Maybe they were trying to make lunch trays or sandals and accidentally invented history. Historians still argue whether papyrus was developed purely for record-keeping or whether it started as a ritual material for temple inscriptions. Either way, the result was revolutionary. The first portable, rollable, affordable medium for information. In short, the birth of office paperwork. Inside the scriptorium, you watch scribes prepare ink, charcoal soot, water, and gum arabic stirred into little clay pots. Their brushes are sharpened reeds, split at the tip like quills. A scribe dips his pen, breathes slowly, and draws a single looping symbol for life. You realize you're witnessing not just writing, but the act of creation itself. The transformation of sound into shape, thought into permanence. A small boy nearby recites from a lesson tablet. His voice is flat, sleepy, but precise. "To be a scribe is to command men with ink," he drones. The teacher nods approvingly, probably remembering his own years of repetition. Scribe school was no playground. It was memorization, discipline, and blisters from sitting cross-legged too long. But the payoff was enormous. Status, comfort, and the enviable privilege of not having to lift heavy stones under the desert sun. The ancient equivalent of getting promoted to middle management. One teacher smirks and tells a joke that somehow survives through millennia. "A man without a scribe's training is like a donkey without a tail." The class groans, but you catch a few smiles. Humor, it seems, thrives even under authoritarian dynasties. As the morning heat builds, a messenger bursts in carrying a basket wrapped in linen. Inside are papyrus scrolls from another province, each labeled with neat hieroglyphic marks. Grain reports, temple inventories, tax receipts, all evidence of a system so vast it makes your local DMV look like a lemonade stand. The Egyptians invented more than paper. They invented the concept of somebody somewhere has to file this properly. One scroll you peek at lists deliveries for a pyramid construction site. Tons of limestone, gallons of beer for workers, even 24 pairs of sandals issued to masons. Bureaucracy, you realize, isn't glamorous, but without it, the world's greatest monuments might never have existed. Those precise numbers meant food reached the laborers, tools were tracked, and no one accidentally walked off with the pharaoh's chisel. The quirky tidbit? Archaeologists have found ancient Egyptian sticky notes, tiny ostraka, or shards of pottery used for quick memos or math problems. They're covered with doodles, snarky remarks, and half-finished letters. You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of, "Remind me to follow up with the grain counter from Thebes." Bureaucracy, it seems, has always had a casual Friday. As noon burns down, you drift through a warehouse filled with papyrus scrolls stacked in clay jars. The labels flutter slightly in the breeze, each one a frozen whisper of someone's task list. You run your fingers over a seal pressed with the image of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of writing and wisdom. He's basically their patron saint of spreadsheets. Historians still debate whether Egyptian record-keeping was purely practical or also spiritual. Did they write because they had to, or because they believed that what was written became eternal? Maybe both. Maybe every grain tally and border dispute doubled as a prayer that something, anything, could last beyond death. In the corner, a scribe dozes against a column, ink stains on his knees. You can tell he's been up all night, probably finishing the royal census. You can't help smiling. There's a strange comfort in knowing that ancient humans also procrastinated, that even 4,000 years ago, someone muttered, "I'll finish it tomorrow." The breeze from the river carries a papery rustle, and for a moment it sounds almost like the sigh of parchment in a modern office. The connection stretches across time. You, hunched over a laptop, them, bent over papyrus, both chasing order through chaos, both leaving trails of ink that outlive their owners. The Egyptians might have built pyramids, but what really made them immortal were their records. The receipts, the signatures, the endless lists that said, "We were here, we mattered." And as the sun dips low again, the ink dries to a soft matte sheen. You watch the scribes roll up their scrolls, tie them with linen threads, and tuck them carefully into jars. The first filing system hums quietly into place. Somewhere an overseer nods, satisfied. Tomorrow more papyrus will arrive. More words, more numbers, more traces of human persistence. For now, though, the Nile is glowing bronze and your eyelids grow heavy. The paperwork can wait, just like it's waited for 5,000 years.
By now, the Nile night feels familiar. The steady whisper of water, the low murmur of insects, the faint scent of ink that seems to cling to your fingertips. You wander through a quieter quarter of the city, past walls etched with the faint outlines of hieroglyphs, until you find another building, a little less official, a little more secretive. Inside, a small group of scribes sit in a loose circle. The lamps burn low, the papyrus scrolls are tucked away, and for the first time, you sense that this is less about numbers and more about people. This is the world of Egypt's scribes, the ancient equivalent of an elite club, a fraternity of wordsmiths, bureaucrats, and occasional philosophers. If the farmers were the muscles of the kingdom and the priests were the soul, then the scribes were its nervous system, quietly carrying every thought, decree, and demand through the veins of the empire. To be a scribe was to belong to a rare breed, literate, respected, but also burdened by the endless flow of ink that never seemed to stop. You sit beside one young man hunched over a scrap of papyrus. His name might be something like En-Kapere, which sounds intimidating until you hear him yawn mid-sentence. He's writing a letter, not for his superiors, but to a fellow scribe in another district. It's mostly gossip, of course. Who got promoted, who accidentally spilled ink on the vizier's decree, who's been pretending to be too sick to work but somehow manages to show up perfectly healthy for festival days. Human Nature, 2000 BCE edition. He grins when he notices your interest and whispers, "Don't tell anyone, but we have competitions." You raise an eyebrow, and he explains, informal duels of penmanship, style, or wit. The prize? Sometimes a loaf of honey bread, sometimes bragging rights that last for months. Apparently, even in ancient Egypt, office culture had its share of petty rivalries and inside jokes. A teacher nearby, an older man with a voice rough from decades of dictation, begins reciting from memory. Be a scribe, it saves you from labor. You are the one who commands others, not the one commanded." The younger scribes chuckle. They've heard this propaganda before. It's copied endlessly in school texts meant to motivate tired apprentices. You can almost imagine ancient motivational posters, a smiling scribe holding a pen, the caption reading, "Write your future." Historians still argue whether this class of scribes held true power or merely reflected it. On one hand, they served kings and priests, translating royal will into written law. On the other, they quietly shaped how history itself was remembered. A slightly generous scribe could turn a mediocre pharaoh into a legend with just a few flattering adjectives. Sound familiar? Bureaucrats have always known how to spin a report. You're handed a small scroll to examine. It's a fragment from something called the Satire of the Trades, a humorous text where a scribe mocks every other profession, fishermen, soldiers, even barbers, for their hardships, proudly concluding that the scribe's life is superior. You can't help but smirk. It's the world's earliest workplace rant, probably written on a bad day after too much ink inhalation. But beyond the jokes and self-importance, there's real devotion. The scribes believed their writing connected them to the gods, especially Thoth, who measured the words of mortals against the cosmic ledger of truth. When they wrote, they weren't just documenting, they were participating in creation itself. Every inventory, every love poem, every tax record carried the echo of divine order. The quirky part? Some scribes wrote on bones, limestone flakes, or even bits of broken pottery when papyrus ran short. One piece discovered at Deir el-Medina has what appears to be a doodle of a cat chasing a goose, possibly the earliest documented case of an employee doodling during a meeting. You can almost hear the supervisor's sigh echo through millennia. As the evening wears on, you notice how quiet they've become. Each scribe is lost in concentration, the rhythm of pen and breath merging into something almost meditative. The flicker of flame casts long shadows over their faces, and you sense that they know exactly how fleeting their words can be. One day, the papyrus will crumble, the ink will fade, the scrolls will vanish into dust, and yet somehow they keep writing. You think of your own modern world where data disappears into clouds and servers, where billions of words are typed and forgotten. The difference is just the medium. The impulse is the same: to record, to share, to prove you existed. The ancient scribes may have worked under pharaohs, but they were also the first historians, the first bureaucratic poets, the first humans to stare at an empty page and think, what if this matters someday? One of the older men sighs and rolls up his scroll. He says, "Writing is remembrance." Then he blows out his lamp, and the room falls into shadow except for the glow from the doorway. The Nile hums in the distance, and the city's heart beats quietly around you. You feel the weight of every word that's ever been written, every record, every mistake, every hope pressed into papyrus. Somewhere in the dark, a reed pen scratches one last line. A prayer, a confession, or just a reminder to bring more ink tomorrow. And though the scribes fade from view, their invisible work continues, binding a civilization together, one careful stroke at a time.
The morning light slants gold through the palace courtyard, glinting off polished stone and the slow ripple of fountains that seem designed purely to remind everyone how much power water and paperwork can hold in this land. You're ushered into a grand hall, lined with towering columns painted in deep lapis and ochre, and the first thing you notice is not the beauty, but the silence. Not a single reed pen moves without permission. Every scribe here works beneath the gaze of Pharaoh's seal, which sits heavy and radiant on a high dais, like the world's most intimidating "sign here" stamp. This, you realize, is Pharaoh's filing cabinet, or more precisely, an archive chamber containing the machinery of empire. Stacks of papyrus rolls sit inside clay jars labeled with neat hieroglyphic symbols, names, years, totals, decrees. Each one represents a life, a law, or a loaf of bread carefully accounted for. Here, history isn't written in poetry. It's tallied, tabulated, approved, and filed under eternal. You drift past the record keepers as they unroll long scrolls filled with neat lines of numbers, census reports, tax inventories, temple donations. Each symbol is small but powerful. One mark can mean an extra day's labor, another can erase a debt. The scribes here are the invisible architects of order, ensuring that the kingdom's resources flow like the Nile itself, steady, measurable, and entirely under control. One overseer points out a scroll listing grain deliveries for the construction of the Great Pyramid. You trace your eyes across the rows of careful hieroglyphs, measurements of barley, amounts of beer, lists of workers and their rations. Without this relentless record-keeping, you realize, the entire project would have collapsed. The pyramid wasn't built just by hands of stone, but by the pens of men who made sure those hands were fed. And yet, you can sense the tension here. Bureaucracy has always walked a fine line between control and chaos. A single misplaced record could mean disaster, lost taxes, unpaid soldiers, even rebellion. One scribe near you sighs and scratches out a line and muttering under his breath. You lean closer and catch the phrase, "The gods of ink are never merciful." You suspect he's not exaggerating. Historians still argue whether Pharaoh's archives were truly as vast as they appear in legend. Some say each new ruler cleared out the previous dynasty's paperwork like an ancient spring cleaning. Others believe the archives stretched across generations, meticulously updated until the desert swallowed them whole. Either way, what survives gives the sense of an early data center, rows of records humming with the quiet energy of empire. You pause at a wall painting showing officials weighing grain on scales. The image is familiar. A bureaucratic ritual frozen in time. The official to the left records the numbers, the one to the right seals the jar with clay and a royal mark. It's essentially double-entry bookkeeping, 4,000 years early. You half expect someone to mutter about needing another copy for compliance. In a corner, you notice a curious sight. A wooden chest filled with fragments of papyrus, each marked with red ink. These, you're told, are errors, documents with mistakes too serious to use. The red ink is the mark of correction, the color of accountability. The scribe responsible will probably spend the rest of the week copying hymns as penance. You can't help smiling. Apparently, ancient Egypt invented the concept of, oops, wrong file. And then there's the quirky detail that makes you laugh softly. Somewhere in the records of a Middle Kingdom estate, archaeologists found a papyrus documenting a missing shipment of geese, followed by an official memo ordering an investigation. The ancient Egyptian version of "Where did those expense reports go?" Bureaucracy, it turns out, comes with built-in mysteries. A royal clerk steps forward carrying a long scroll sealed with gold thread. It's the latest decree from the pharaoh, requiring a recount of livestock in the southern nomes. The scribe beside him unrolls a fresh sheet of papyrus and begins writing the response, his reed pen moving with elegant precision. You can almost feel the centuries between you collapse, because suddenly it doesn't look ancient at all. It looks like every office where an urgent request lands right before closing time. You move toward the doorway for some air. Outside, the hum of the city resumes, the clatter of donkey carts, the laughter of children, the calls of vendors hawking bread and dates. Yet even here, the presence of paperwork lingers. Market scribes sit under awnings, recording sales. Guards note down entries and exits at city dates. Temple clerks count donations one bead at a time. Writing, you realize, has wrapped itself around everything. It's both the heartbeat and the leash of the kingdom, controlling trade, law, even religion. Somewhere a priest is copying out a hymn, elsewhere a bureaucrat is tallying taxes on the same papyrus stock. The medium unites them all, a kind of silent infrastructure beneath the divine spectacle. Historians still argue whether Egypt's bureaucratic precision was driven by devotion to the gods or simple survival instinct. Maybe it was both. After all, the Nile's floods were unpredictable, and famine loomed just one bad season away. So they measured, recorded, and stored, not just grain, but faith itself. As the sun begins to dip, you hear the faint clink of clay jar lids closing in the archive room. Another day's paperwork sealed away forever. The air smells faintly of ink and dust, a scent of permanence that somehow feels fragile. You imagine centuries later, archaeologists unearthing these scrolls, reading the same numbers, marveling at how even the smallest entries, 2 baskets of figs delivered, 1 tool returned, can echo so clearly across time. The lamps are lit again, flickering against the polished walls. Somewhere deep inside this endless machinery of ink and reed, a scribe yawns, stretches his back, and dips his pen once more. The pharaoh may rule with divine power, but it's this quiet army of record-keepers who make sure the world doesn't fall apart before breakfast. And as you step back into the cooling night, the Nile glows silver under the moon, steady and ancient, just like the flow of paper that began here and never truly stopped.
The night has returned again, soft and heavy, wrapping the Nile Valley in its slow rhythm. You stand on the edge of the riverbank, where the reeds hum in the breeze and the stars burn faintly above like ancient pinholes in a dark scroll. You can still hear the faint echoes of scratching pens from the archives behind you. The sound drifts across the water, quieter now, almost ghostly. You realize that even as those scribes fade into the dark, their words remain alive. They ripple outward through time, changing shape but never quite disappearing. You start walking along the embankment, past ruins half buried in sand. Somewhere under your feet lie forgotten storerooms filled with rolled papyrus, sealed and hidden centuries ago. Some survived, most didn't. But those that did have outlived kings, wars, floods, and even the gods they praised. You imagine one such papyrus, brittle, yellow, still faintly marked with black hieratic script. It might record something trivial, a list of temple offerings or the inventory of a bakery. But it has crossed more than 3 millennia just to end up in a museum case under sterile glass. It's strange, isn't it? The Egyptians built monuments that touched the clouds, but what really carried them into eternity wasn't stone, it was paperwork. The pyramids might have weathered the wind, but it's the ink, the careful looping handwriting that truly preserved their world. Without those scrolls, we wouldn't know their laws, their poetry, their jokes, and even their daily headaches about goose shipments gone missing. Bureaucracy, it turns out, is the only magic that's reliably permanent. Historians still argue whether Egypt's obsession with record-keeping was about control or remembrance. Maybe it was both, a way to preserve order in a universe that constantly shifted under the weight of time. You look out at the river again, realizing how many cycles it's seen. Every generation wrote its own version of the truth on papyrus, then handed it downstream. Some stories survived. Others sank like silt. You reach a small village near the desert's edge, where workers once lived, builders, artisans, scribes' assistants. Here, shards of pottery litter the ground like broken sentences. You pick one up and find faint traces of ink, someone's handwriting, clumsy and urgent. It's an ostracon. An ancient scrap note. Maybe it was a shopping list, or a teacher's reprimand, or a joke that no one's laughed at for 4,000 years. The edges are smooth from centuries of wind, but the ink is still faintly visible. You feel a twinge of awe. Someone touched this. Someone who worried about the same things you do: time, memory, and whether their handwriting looked neat enough. The quirky detail that lingers in your mind. Archaeologists have found papyri used for the most mundane purposes: complaints about missing sandals, receipts for borrowed donkeys, even the earliest customer feedback note from a man angry that his linen wasn't delivered on time. It's bureaucracy at its most human, petty, funny, alive. And yet, buried among all those daily records are glimpses of poetry, wisdom, even tenderness. A scribe named Pentower once wrote, "The reed pen is my tongue, the papyrus my breath." You can almost feel his pride, his exhaustion, and his quiet joy in making something lasting. It's the same feeling you get when you finish a task, no matter how small, and sense that you've left a mark on the day. The air cools further, and a faint desert wind rises, whispering through the reeds. You glance toward the horizon, where the pyramids glow dimly in moonlight, those vast stone triangles surrounded by the invisible paperwork that kept them possible. The pharaohs are gone, the priests forgotten, but the scribes, they're still here. Every historian, every accountant, every person who's ever labeled a folder or named a file is their descendant. You are too, in your own way. You close your eyes for a moment, and the rustle of papyrus seems to blend with the rhythm of your breath. Maybe history isn't about grand empires or divine rulers. Maybe it's about all the quiet record keepers writing life down before it disappears. Maybe the true monument of Egypt isn't the pyramid. It's the idea that words, once written, can outlast everything else. The ink fades. The papyrus curls at the edges. The wind grows softer. Somewhere, far away, a page turns. So now, as the story settles into stillness, you can let your mind drift with the slow current of the Nile. The lamps have gone out one by one. The scribes have tucked away their scrolls, and even the river seems to breathe slower under the weight of night. The same moon that watched over ancient hands guiding reed pens now shines faintly across your room. You imagine those quiet offices fading into mist, columns dissolving, papers curling into dust, until only the rhythm of ink remains, steady and calm. The noise of the world begins to thin, each thought untangling from the next, like papyrus strips peeled apart before pressing. There is nothing left to count, nothing left to file, just the gentle reassurance that somewhere in the great ledger of time, your day has been recorded too. The air grows softer. The edges of your thoughts blur. You can almost hear the lapping of water against stone, the faint creak of a storage jar's lid, the distant call of a night bird gliding over the river. Everything ancient and everything modern merging into one long exhale. Let your breath follow the river now, slow, patient, endless. The paperwork is finished, the ink has dried, and the story has been filed away, neatly and forever, somewhere between sand and stars. The end. Sweet dreams.